This meeting is now being recorded.
And will gradually increase the tempo. Ultimately, we hope to do these on a fairly routine and aggressive cadence, producing content at the same speed as the market itself. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Geoff Cotrupe, our Industry Director for Big Data and Analytics. Geoff's been with Stratecast for nearly 8 years and brings a wealth of experience dating back decades. As I noted, he is the architect of our new Big Data and Analytics practice and is our Master of Ceremonies for this webinar. Geoff, take it away.
Thank you, Mike. Since I did not hit the record in time to capture all of your information, I'll just, that was Mike Jude, Ph.D. He's a research manager who runs 3 of our practices at Stratecast, Frost & Sullivan, Consumer Communication Services, Connected Home, and Big Data Analytics. So thanks for that great introduction, Mike, and then I will move forward. In addition to Mike, joining me on this, I'm Geoff Cotrupe, Industry Director, Big Data and Analytics, and joining me on this webinar are Andy Sheldon, Vice President of Marketing from Unifi Software, Murthy Mathiprakasam, Director of Product Marketing for Informatica, and Peter Evans, Senior Director, Big Data Solutions at Solix. So just some quick logistics here up front. You can count on continuing content about this, as Mike described. Here are a number of the places where you can find us online. So stay tuned for more content. A quick word of thanks to others who collaborated with us on this research, free site, IBM, and Tamer. Again, there's a contact points for us there, and so you can find us. And there's the link to access the webinar on demand. It'll be at that link, and it will likely be a link from there to a video. But stay tuned and check that out for on-demand access to this. So let me move forward real quickly here. Data issues that those of you in the market tell us are keeping you up at night. Completeness. Is the data we're using the most relevant current data, and is it complete? Are we making the best available information, accessible to our organizations? Quality, accuracy, and trust. Are we ensuring data quality at the source and the pipeline and the data sets that are being created? And by the way, can I trust the outcome of this prep job that I'm running right now? Reporting and visualization tools and services make data look exciting and polished, but where's the proof? What's under the hood? Where's the proof that the numbers are actually correct? Usage, the democratization of data. Who's using data? What are they learning? And how can we help more people across our organization access data and get value out of it? If data prep tools cater only to the technically oriented data experts and analysts, there's going to be bottlenecks, and business users will look for alternatives to get their work done. That's actually really the perfect lead into the next thing that you tell us is keeping you up at night, which is privacy and other risks. Where does all of my data reside? And how do I guard against users creating data transformations that then may expose sensitive personal data that's in your systems, even if the original data, for example, was masked and otherwise secured? We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then the last thing here is cost, and we're talking here about the opportunity cost of missed market windows, revenue generation and retention opportunities, and the human resource costs associated with data prep. So now I said I would focus a little bit more on privacy here, and I will on this slide. These are the key provisions of the GDPR that, frankly, are keeping a lot of companies up at night. And data prep and data governance are key to being able to avoid privacy violations that could become, as you see there, very expensive, very fast. I would say especially with regard to things like the right to access, people to access their own data, the right for the ability to ask you to provide it to them in a portable form that they can take elsewhere, the right to have you erase data from your systems, all of them, at a moment's notice upon request, and really for any reason. Data governance and data prep are really key to all of that. And by the way, GDPR isn't the only game in town. The FTC in the U.S. is getting very, very active, much more active recently in terms of suing companies who violate privacy. The healthcare industries and financial industries in the U.S. have maybe had to be more concerned because of some of the patchwork of regulations in the U.S. pertaining to privacy, but any business has to. And, oh, by the way, there are other regulations on the books in most countries around the world, and I know because I've read through most of them. And the other thing about the GDPR, one other point here, not that this is our focus, but it can affect any company anywhere on the planet who has any data from EU citizens as well as UK citizens, which UK is honoring GDPR. So just to make the point that data prep and data governance and all of this is really important to privacy. So another challenge that we're dealing with here is the explosion of new data sources. With enterprises, we have specified 40 different, or more than 40 now, specific data sources at Stratecast that an enterprise needs to be aware of and consider and access. And if the enterprise happens to be a CSP, an operator, telco, however you want to say it, there are about 14 more. The IoT is already unleashing massive new volumes of data out there, and now the next generation of data sources, drones, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and all of that, and location and geospatial data that's becoming more and more important. It's just complicating, and a lot more data coming in, and a lot more data that we have to prepare and be able to use for analytic insights. Blockchain, by the way, we break that out, yes, because it's not just about cryptocurrencies. Some companies we know of already are putting blockchain to work in things like ad tech and retail and e-commerce. So anyway, just a lot of new data sources. Now, data prep is crucial, right? It's also draining IT and data resources, data science resources, that is. What we're dealing with first is when we're trying to deal with this, a lot of the times we're dealing with it with fragmented data management and data prep tools. The thing about that, first of all, it makes governance hard across the organization, but to us it's replacing the old data silo concerns. Now we have data prep silos. And so that makes it really hard to discover data up front, and then once it's in the system to locate it going forward, and it makes governance difficult or impossible across the enterprise. And in fact, we assert that because of what's going on, the amount of data and the tools being used, that companies are spending up to 80% of their time cleansing and normalizing the data before they go after these analytic insights that we all say we want. So just to take a step back here, we now have more data available to us than ever before. It's now recognized, rightly so, as a strategic asset, the lifeblood of your company. But the analytic insights require optimized approaches to data prep in order to even get close to those insights that we're talking about. And here we're talking about ETL or ELT, depending on where the transformations are taking place, or data mashups, data wrangling, data blending, sort of on the business user side, however you want to say it or brand it. So basically, we're talking about all of these steps necessary to acquire, prepare, curate, and as it says there, to manage your data assets. Very important. Now, as important as that is, there are certainly barriers to adoption of data prep right now. I wanted to walk through a few of them. First of all, existing investments in ETL and BI tools. And we think companies can get the false idea that they have data prep covered, or we have cases where competing departments and budgets can get in the way. That's certainly true. Another barrier is integrating data prep with existing big data and IT infrastructure can be an issue. Another one is the fact that, frankly, data prep tools can still be resource intensive to acquire and implement. And even if they're easier now to acquire and to implement, the implementation still must be managed. That can throw up roadblocks inside the organization. That use of data by business users, the democratization we talked about, very, very welcome, but there are fears that it will lead to data leaks, and that even if it doesn't lead to data leaks and breaches, that it may lead to transformations creating many, many different, wildly different treatments of similar data across the organization so that it gets away from data consistency. And, of course, I referred to that just a second ago. We'll go past that bullet. But then proceeding from data discovery to data prep, if that's still, for example, if finding a data source in the prep phase is great, but if it requires IT intervention, for example, to make a bulk offload into Spark for data prep, let's say, that's not really self-service. It's more like IT augmented service. it adds to IT's workload, and it creates, resistance to adopting data prep in the organization. So what do we say you ought to do about this? We've come up with something of a blueprint, and my co-presenting companies here are going to add to this and augment this, I'm pretty sure, as we go along. But we have a blueprint. And so first of all, identifying your decision set, defining the end game first will simplify data prep for you. Select your data sources to support those decisions. Establish the data cleansing process. Now, number 4, in the first bullet, I talked about identifying the decision set first, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to impose limitations on data going forward. You need to continually prep and assimilate new data into your existing data sets. That's really the key to good decision making, okay? Standardizing data assets and automating process. I'm going to pick out a few of these as we go, but some really interesting process controls here. First of all, number 6, the ability to see and control prep job versions. Being able to revert back to earlier versions and build from there, and things like the ability to filter and shape output before committing a transform. And number 7, these things dramatically can reduce data prep processing time. And then collaboration sort of goes along with that, really. Reusing data prep jobs, or at least leveraging the learnings from previous data prep jobs, saves a lot of time and money, quote unquote, reinventing the wheel. Some other things we think are important, certainly some different, number 10, some different technologies and techniques. I want to focus on AI, though, in terms of spotting opportunities in data and easing data prep, eliminating a lot of the point and click, automatically identifying issues and applying the fixes, applying to outputting, rather, to various formats, very important, and we noted some of them there. Also, operationalizing data prep across the enterprise by integrating with things like CRM and marketing automation and other systems. We think that's important. Another sort of operational thing, the ability to swap out processing environments. And without going into a lot of detail on that, and some of our presenters may, the data prep equivalent of being able to choose various shipping options, like from Amazon or Alibaba. So that can be important. Then there's 2 that are focused on privacy, and number 1 is, first of all, governance of transformation. I think I alluded to this earlier. Governance throughout the process, including data prep, is critical if you're really going to get a handle on information and avoid revealing sensitive personal information unwittingly. And then also using things like automated data masking and lineage tracking so that data scientists and really all users are able to access sensitive information without committing those privacy and increasingly expensive privacy violations. Then last, and really not least, though I just made it last sort of for emphasis, was to obtain feedback from your data consumers. So we need to harvest not just data, but harvest feedback from your users. And that's the only way to really optimize data quality going forward. Not the only way, but in concert with all these other ways that we're identifying here. It's all about continuous improvement, and we think that's important. So as I say, this will be in the deck. You'll be able to access it, but we think it's important to mention. And let me just jump back real quickly. Some results of that. I didn't pop these on the screen, but, repeatable and predictable data pipelines, focus your data scientist time where it matters most, identifying which data to apply to which business problems, cross-functional collaboration between data science and data management, and frankly, across the enterprise, right? Enhancing revenue generation and retention, and then, in my view, creating a truly data-driven and agile organization. So now moving forward here, just a quick word about where data prep fits and where it's headed. Yes, we break out by regions and by verticals, the big data and analytics market, but we do it another way also, which is by these 5 major functional areas, which break out into now 34 different types of solutions. And data prep and governance and all of this fits into the big data and analytics core products and services area, which, by the way, we forecast to top $9 billion globally by the year 2025. So it's important, it's growing, you need to be doing something about it, and there's big opportunity here. So with that, as sort of setting the table there, our next presenter is Andy Sheldon, VP Marketing of Unifi Software. So, Andy, I'll turn it over to you.
Geoff, thank you, and appreciate the setting the table there. It's going to be a very nice meal. So, picking up on exactly what you just said, what we're seeing now is more organizations are getting into the idea of self-service data. The importance of trusted data is really becoming a front and center issue for organizations. How many times have you gone into a meeting with a dashboard where the first question is, where did you get this data? So understanding how trusted data is playing a role in the self-service environment. When you have a search capability across all of your disparate data in the organization, the search results are returned. How are those research results displayed to you? What is the ranking order? And in our view, the trusted data floats to the top of those search results. So if you were searching for something to do with customer data, then if there was a trusted data or curated data source or set, which was your customer data, that would be the top result. So if you started to use that, you could be assured that the results associated with that information could be there. It's interesting as Geoff sets this up and going through his list. Many of the things that he talked about cross multiple disciplines in what we think of today as sort of information management, from the sort of the cataloging discovery of data to the function of data prep that we're talking about here, the sort of transformation of that, the setting up of data pipelines is sort of an operational aspect of it. And the ability to collaborate. I think, Geoff pointed out that most of what prep is today is a very individual thing. People have got their own prep tool that sits next to the BI tool, and they're kind of doing their own thing. This was an example. I spoke with a company the other day in the pharmaceutical space, and this head of IT supporting a group or team of scientists said that recently a scientist had come to him and said, hey, look, what I need to be able to do is I want to combine these 4 data sources together to be able to see this. And he said, Andy, that it's unconscionable to me that in the 8 years of developing this drug that we haven't taken those 4 data sources and combined together. I know we have. It's just so obvious that we have, but we can't find it. Nobody knows where that is. And so this importance of collaboration around your data so that people, as you work on something, the insights that you gain out of the data, the editing of metadata or description information about a single attribute, the ability to score data, describe a data transformation, look at multiple iterations of that data transformation and annotate it so that when the next person in your organization comes along and searches for something in the search in the catalog, the data transformation jobs are one of the things that get surfaced associated with that. And so collaboration is a key part of this. It's an area that Unifi it's across the platform in all forms. There's essentially a Slack-like integration that allows people to comment and ask questions of data. A simple use case, I search in the catalog to find something. I find some data that's of interest to me. In our UI, that data, if you weren't given permission to access it, would be grayed out. There's a button that says, I want to request access. If you hit that button, the collaboration pillar of Unifi sends a notification to the data steward, who's really running the governance and security aspect of the platform, and says, hey, Geoff wants to get access to this data. The steward can then look at the role that Geoff has in the organization, what permissions under their access policy Geoff is allowed to have, and can grant either restricted or unrestricted access. So Geoff talked about the need for tagging, auto-tagging, and being able to then automatically mask data, so especially around things like compliance issues as you referenced. And really the key part of that and the central core of the modern sort of enterprise information management platform is this concept of how do you use AI throughout this end-to-end data pipeline process. where AI at the start is essentially profiling the data, understanding or discovering information about that data, finding automatically PII or other sensitive data such as FICO score or credit card and so on, and setting up a program that says, hey, if you find this, automatically mask that for us. And right the way through the data pipeline then, as we think about, this area of growing number of data sets, as Geoff points out, this idea then of using AI to sort of extract out the one-to-one prep versus BI platform, create a platform for doing data preparation where the data can be of any flavor, in any source, in any location, in any structure, and the output can be in whatever flavor of application or BI tool or visualization or data science platform that you want to consume it in. This essentially middleware layer, this abstraction layer, provides the most flexibility to have the most people in your organization collaborating around the function of data prep. And extending the AI capabilities, when Unifi detects the data source, it's going to look at that data by profiling the data within the source, and it's going to establish some things that it knows automatically about that data that might require typical cleansing jobs like normalization or deduplication or address or email address verification, phone number normalization. It might be parsing of XML data, for example, to give it some structure. These things are going to be detected by the AI, and when the user comes in and selects that data source in the prep phase, the recommendation engine is saying, hey, you've selected this data, and most people want to normalize this data to do this. Do you want to do that? And we call it one-click functions. You simply click the button and it's done. And that shared learning, hey, people who do this also do that. It's essentially like adding market basket analysis to your data. So as people start using the tools and gaining those insights across the organization, all of that becomes reusable assets, including operational workflows. Hey, I've created this, and I want to operationalize this pipeline, so I want to, go get incremental data capture from the source. I want to run these kinds of cleansing jobs. I want to do this transformation, and I want to do that every night. And that should be able to set up by the business user and the analyst to be able to create that environment. So, listen, I realize this is a bit of an eye chart, and for me with very bad eyesight, that actually doesn't work great. So if anybody's interested in getting this, please just email me at Andy@Unifi Software. But this is how we have gone around architecting the platform, which integrates the catalog and discovery piece, centered around the data governance and security platform, and all of that, and the underlying prep function, which runs on either Hadoop or Spark, is sort of run by the AI engine. It's really weaved right the way through the platform. Various ways to go about doing this. This is how we've chosen to do that, by abstracting different aspects of the data and providing these kinds of integrated services on the data pipeline for the business analyst, the data scientists, and everybody else in the organization. And really, the last part of this, and then I'll move on let others move on, is that once you've got AI looking at your data, your ability to get insights out of that data moves up the stack, if you like, in the organization. You don't have to be a data scientist to gain insights or a business analyst. Just asking natural language queries of your data catalog, what is the median house price of single-family homes in San Mateo County right now, is essentially a search that can be had with natural language processing that parses that statement and finds the attributes that are associated with it, has the statistical heuristics on the data to be able to return that result. So instant access for people at any level of knowledge across the organization. And with that, I appreciate the time. I'm going to hand it over now to Murthy.
There you go. Thank you, Andy, and thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So, yes, my name is Murthy Mathiprakasam. I'm Director of Product Marketing at Informatica, and thanks again to Geoff for the opportunity to present some of our observations on this, very emerging area, as Geoff mentioned. which has been fraught with a lot of opportunity, but also, a lot of very interesting challenges as well. So one of the observations that we have seen, and I think we're going to see some of these themes come up throughout today's presentation, is the fact that when we talk about data preparation, it's really a multi-persona problem. It affects different data stakeholders inside of the organization in slightly different ways. So when we talk about this, from kind of the more classic IT type of personas, they're affected by this problem of how do I get raw sets of data into, as the previous speaker mentioned, kind of more trusted forms of data in a productive way. Because, business cycles are accelerating. Nobody can sit and wait for these processes to occur. And we've had, some of our customers report that kind of the old traditional antiquated ways of doing these things can take up to 2 to 3 weeks. And that simply doesn't meet the kind of expectations of business today. The other thing is, even if you manage to get it done in some sort of a heroic effort once, you're not able to do it in a reusable and repeatable way. So you'll see a quote here also from our customers. It's one thing to kind of do this in a very labor-intensive and manual way, as opposed to one that is powered by technology and is more of a systematic approach. On the business side of things, the impact of inability to prepare data in a systematic way is, again, you can't trust the data. And this is actually quite a challenging issue, especially depending on what the impact of trust could be on the business domain. When you're talking about sensitive information, customer information, having a lack of trust isn't just a matter of there being some simple inaccuracies. It literally can mean that you're doing the wrong thing, you're sending wrong information to customers. There might be legal consequences to some of this as well. And speaking of kind of legal consequences, as there is more and more kind of regulatory pressure around data around the world, and we're especially seeing this in Europe right now, you have to have a certain kind of understanding of what data you even have access to in the first place, and be able to generate reports and audits as needed, so that when the data is being prepared, there's an audit trail that makes it very clear what's going on with the data preparation. So what we've observed is a couple of the best practices here, and I just tried to list out a couple that I found as the top ones. And I may not necessarily go through each one here, in the webinar, but it's certainly good reference for everybody. But the biggest thing, again, it goes back to that quote in the previous slide, is around really being very systematic. I think that's the greatest principle I've seen around customers. That it's one thing to kind of think you can do something as a test project or a pilot, but you want to have some sort of system around it that can manage the effort. And so some of the couple of best practices we've seen from customers, for example, start with a business goal. Sounds very, very simple, but it's actually very common that in the spirit of experimentation, a project takes off, but then midway through the project, you're not really sure what the end goal is, and that can really throw off the overall data preparation process a little bit, because if you don't know what battle you're fighting, you're not really sure if you're winning it or losing it. All the basic kind of principles of data management, like security, governance, being able to automate the process of actually generating this data as much as possible. All of this is very relevant in the world of big data and in some of these emerging technologies. It's arguably to be even more relevant than it was in the classical data warehousing days, because of the extreme volume, extreme variety of data that's available. The need to automate these processes and apply the kind of traditional principles of data governance, data security becomes exceptionally important here. I'll make one more comment here, which is, I think is a very intriguing concept that a lot of people, I think, are starting to embrace, which is the idea of using data science techniques to aid data science work. And so one of the things that's happened is you'll find that this kind of emerging role in a lot of organizations around data scientists who largely are doing some of this data prep work. The challenge is that they end up spending more of their time on the data prep than they do on the data science. And so that's obviously not a good balance in terms of how their very, very exclusive time is used. And so one of the ideas that's emerging now is the idea of using data science techniques on the data preparation process itself. So we can actually look at the structure of data, perform some correlation analysis, and actually make inferences about the structure of the data that then aid the data scientists and make even better use of their very, very critical time so that they're not actually spending all their time looking for data and trying to figure out if it's trustworthy or not. We can actually fully automate that with data science techniques so that it effectively makes their time even more productive and more focused on where they can add the most value. Just a couple more of these best practices, and again, I won't go through every single bullet. You can read through the bullets as you feel, but I want to just emphasize the key ones. I think one other thing that's very important is leveraging metadata services. Metadata services is something that some organizations just grasp very, very intuitively, which is this idea that you have maybe a kind of enterprise data catalog or some sort of system that actually captures what data assets are in the organization, and then you can use that as a basis for establishing that common understanding. That's very, very critical, and it solves a lot of the challenges that organizations have around data preparation, because instead of every single user having to start from scratch, trying to identify what data there is, trying to prepare it, doing it as a one-off, having their work, in some cases, just go to waste, because once they're done with the project, their data that they prepared just doesn't really go anywhere. A central metadata services engine actually catalogs, creates kind of a library of all of the data in the enterprise. So as different users create new trusted data sets, all of that is checked back into the data catalog, and now other users can come and just start from where somebody else has finished. And so there's a tremendous acceleration that can happen when you start to leverage metadata services, because now, instead of relying literally on manual processes, you have a lot of automation behind you. I'll also maybe touch on the last two bullets here around developing business logic and business rules. So this is very similar to the idea of using data science techniques to help data scientists, which is the idea, again, that we're used to thinking in a kind of business logic, business rules sort of framework when you look at actual data preparation techniques. But you can actually apply this to the data management process overall. So that, for example, if you're thinking about data quality, a lot of the kind of issues that people face around data quality are actually things that can be detected through patterns and remediated through patterns as well. You can actually set aside rules that say, if you see this kind of a mistake, here's how to fix it. And the more, this is very common in the software development industry. We have a system of development, QA, production. It's really just taking that same metaphor and bringing it into the data world, so that as we develop new bugs, in the way the data looks, we can create test suites, using these business rules, so that now moving forward, as new data comes in, we're constantly testing the data and fixing it automatically. And that really, really simplifies the overall data preparation effort across the board. And the final point I'll make is, around the taxonomies and classifications, only because I think it's a very controversial point. A lot of organizations say they debate whether it makes sense to invest in a kind of governance board, somebody that oversees data preparation, and do you want to establish a glossary and actually have standardized terms. And without a doubt, I've seen as a best practice, the organizations that actually take that investment and get organizational alignment around what are the core concepts, core kind of organizational principles around the data, they get such a higher return out of that investment because everybody's on the same page, because there's a lightweight amount of process that just, is just enough to make sure that everybody is preparing data in a consistent and a kind of collaborative way. It's only when you have a lack of governance, a lack of definitions, a lack of taxonomy, where everything is a bit of a free-for-all, and then you have, at best maybe an inefficient process, and at worst it may just be complete chaos, as some organizations have observed. So I think bringing all this together, it's really about getting all of these different data personas, not just focusing on a data scientist, not just focusing on a data steward, not just focusing on the IT guys. It's bringing all the stakeholders together around that notion of a common understanding of the data. That's what kind of an enterprise approach to data preparation really does. It's about making sure the IT guys can operationalize their work and they can get repeatability, making sure that they're fully future-proof. They're not just doing a bunch of one-off efforts. The analysts are, able to contribute information, but they're also benefiting from the work of the other analysts that are a part of this effort here. And the data stewards, they're helping to kind of organize the effort so that everybody else, their productivity is maximized as well. And so I think this is really the pattern that we see as being the one that will take shape in a lot of the large enterprises. Because inevitably there's going to be more data and there's going to be more consumers. And we're going to see this slide, for example, just proliferate into even greater specialization. In a world of increasing complexity and volume of data, and in a world of increasing stakeholders who need access to data, clearly these kind of manual and siloed, kind of non-systematic approaches just simply don't scale. You really do need to build a common understanding of the data, leverage automation, leverage data science techniques in the background to help facilitate this process of data preparation so that every data stakeholder in the organization can get the maximum value from the data. And with that, I will transition over to our next speaker here.
Thank you, Murthy, and welcome to Peter.
Thank you, Geoff. Thank you, Murthy, for that interesting insight into how data works. This is Peter Evans. I'm the Senior Director for Big Data Solutions for Solix Technologies. What I'd like to talk to you about and to expand on the slides that we've currently seen is data preparation in the data environment of the data-driven enterprise. And what we're really looking at are what are the enterprise challenges. The previous speakers have gone over how data is important within an enterprise, how it drives a data-driven enterprise to be successful. But you really need to understand as well what the challenges that are facing data-driven enterprises are. And enterprise analytics is the big thing that we're all talking about, having access to the data, being able to provide a competitive advantage across your enterprise using the sophistication of intelligent methodologies. We've heard about AI, we've heard about machine learning. But the infrastructure that surrounds that is also very important. You need not only to look at your data, but also how your infrastructure is optimized and how you are working with your data to understand the difficulties that may surround controlling your data, understanding how your data is being used, GDPR regulations and requirements, regulatory compliance, archive of data and how long you have to keep that data, where it needs to be kept, obsolete applications and how they are retired. All of that data is important, and you need to really understand, if you're wanting to be successful, how you need to be compliant and cost-effective across the area. So why is all of this important? Well, if you talk about the enterprise data lake or the hybrid data ecosystem or the logical data warehouse, it depends which analyst you go to in reality. They are all the same problem. The problem is, how do you get the analysis of data into the hands of people who need the insights from that data to be able to understand and make the company work better? So basically, analyzing data in real time and extracting value from data structures is fully conceivable. Any type of data structure, whether it be an enterprise data warehouse, whether it be external data, whether it be a NoSQL implementation, whether it be an analytics platform or operational system. And all of that data is basically being used by individual users. And there needs to be a centralized control point, not just for the cleansing of the data and the preparation of the data, but also the control of the data. We always used to talk about in the past years the single version of the truth. And that's still very prevalent in what we're talking about today. But there are also requirements to do analytics on much dirtier data at a quicker pace in a faster environment to get particular result sets. So the one version of the truth, yes, but also having access to the data and being able to work with that data and investigate that data in a discovery phase is also very important. And really, the reason for that is that the whole is obviously greater than the sum of the parts. I've used this in a number of presentations on the 5 laws of data integration, and basically if you understand that everything has a starting point and everything has an end point, data preparation is fully important, and companies cannot achieve a data-driven enterprise if they do not use all of their data. You really need to understand where all of your data resides within an enterprise, not just for regulatory compliance, but for the fact that if you are not using some of that data in your analysis, then your analysis may not be complete. So you need to understand where all of the data is, how you access that data. And we've come across enterprises, and we've worked with enterprises to look at their data lakes and try to understand why they're not getting the results they need. And it's because their data is still siloed, or that data doesn't have context applied to it. And if your data doesn't have context applied to it, how do you understand what is meant to be happening with it? The rule of thumb really is that information always adapts to meet your local needs. If you go back to 1990s with the information engineering movement, it was based on the incorrect notion that enterprises can have a single consistent data model without redundancy. Actually, a more accurate way to look at this information, or the information as a whole, is information equals data plus context. If you don't have data stewards involved, you don't understand what the data is. If you don't understand what the data is, how can you have a meaningful output of that data, even if you have the best analytical tools in the world? We're seeing the ability of AI and ML to help in this area, where you can build a specific model to look at a specific use case, but that model can be tuned by looking at effortless information input from other systems. So it's very important to understand that information without context doesn't help, but information without context will always adapt and lead to problems later in downstream applications if you do not have a way of understanding where it is coming from. So Solix has something called the Common Data Platform, and the reason we talk about the Common Data Platform is that really all data should be part of a common data platform within your organization. Whether it is a physical architecture or a logical architecture, data preparation cannot be done correctly if you don't have the tools and the connectivity to all of your data. So basically, data preparation, in our case, the Analyst Workbench, allows you to discover metadata. We have a fully compliant and articulate metadata repository, which takes data on ingest. It takes data when we connect to data sources. It takes lineage data, and it allows us to understand that data and build it out for our users. And we found very good use cases from companies where they've looked at how to understand their data and used a metadata view of that to understand exactly where it's coming from, exactly where it's being used, and how that data is being put together. The previous speakers have talked about the ability of being able to understand where the data is being used, how it is being touched, who is integrating with that data, and also where the data may be going further. Geoff spoke right at the beginning of the call about GDPR. And one of the things that's very important about GDPR is it is fully aware of where the data is being used, because a user has to come in and request through an activity report of how that data, not only whether you hold it, but also where it is being used. So your landscape, your common data platform, should envision all of that data and where it is can be connected to. So some industry use case examples here. I really wanted to just focus in on this, and this is where we've taken the metadata and the data preparation and how we're helping customers. So application consolidation, taking all of the data from retired applications and moving them into one area and then attaching something like SAP to them. We've deployed this in not just an infrastructure on-premise, but in hybrid infrastructure. So being able to look at the cloud implementations of this. The ability to auto-add metadata based on business rules is hugely important, because the data steward cannot control the context of the data if they cannot add context to that data. Archive and analysis of security data is hugely important in the IoT frame. We heard about the expansion of how that data is being moved and how wide that data is. If you don't have the ability to look at the security of that data, you may not know that that data is either being breached or is being incorrectly used. And support for large data sets for meaningful analysis. For too long, we have been doing analysis on sample data. We should be able to build context into all of our large data sets and actually do analysis from all of that data as we go through. So I'd just like to say one parting message on this, really. From a perspective of applications and the data preparation that is required to actually do advanced analytics on that data, it's very important to understand that a lot of the context from data out of applications is actually held within the application layer. So therefore, data preparation should always have the flexibility to be able to deal with that data at the actual data level, by adding in metadata, by interrogating metadata, or by adding context in another form to the data. And that's what we feel is very, very important for data preparation in this modern age. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to everyone. Great presentations, outstanding insights. Thank you all. Mike Jude is now going to lead our Q&A discussion, and I'm going to encourage all of our presenters to weigh in on any or all of the questions that we pose. So, Mike, take it away. Thank you.
Okay, just a preamble here. Obviously, as in most webinars, we prepared a few questions up front that we thought were likely to generate some sparkling debate or even sparkling commentary. But we also received some questions from some of our clients who, some of whom were on the call today, but some could not make it. So we're in the process of, collecting that information so that we can respond to them. But we'll just start at the top here. Basically, I'm going to start with Geoff on this. Companies of all sizes need data prep, but can companies of all sizes afford it? I know that you've written about this, and I suspect that our panelists also have some notions on this. But let's start with you, Geoff.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you. I think one of the issues is, and it's like this with a number of areas of big data and analytics. It's certainly not just data prep. It's the question of that organizations of all sizes need this stuff, and the question is, how much of it can they afford? Certainly, the open source frameworks, Apache and so forth, have made a lot of this. Sort of the barriers to entry have made it a little easier to get started, at least for the providers. But then the question is, how much of that is passed through and passed along to enterprises but small businesses, smaller folks that need this stuff in their business. So I think our challenge, or one of our challenges certainly, is to make this widely available. And maybe some of our panelists would have some thoughts on that. I mean, my thoughts are that certainly we have seen either free or freemium sorts of models proliferate across at least different parts of the BDA landscape, right? But I'd like their thoughts in this area and how possible that is. Anybody that wants to speak about that.
This is Murthy. I mean, I can chime in really quickly. It really kind of comes down to sort of total cost of ownership, I think, and I know that's sort of overused phrase, in the tech sector, but like what I've observed is, there are organizations that have a greater flexibility to tolerate, having kind of in-house development teams who can kind of maintain code, and they tend to be a little more actively engaged, like you said, in the open source movement. And so for them, the packaged kind of approach, is unnecessary because they actually have in-house development teams. They can actually take on, just like you said, the kind of cost of maintenance and redevelopment and testing and things like that. There's other organizations that don't have that kind of cost tolerance, and so for them, they'd rather effectively outsource that to external vendors. And I think the vendors are addressing accessibility in a variety of ways. Also, there's different ways that software is consumed, and so there's ways that you can sort of start small and grow your environment and things like that. But I think as far as the kind of open source, do-it-yourself approach versus an enterprise, kind of outsourced to a vendor that's done all the work and kind of packaged it, the trade-off really comes down to kind of the ability that the end user has to take on the cost of the development testing of that software versus, their desire to just keep the TCO very low, let a third party handle it, and then they just kind of focus on their core business.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, Geoff, this is Andy.
Yeah, sure.
I would say, one of the things that is helping here is, organizations, enterprises' adoption of cloud environments and cloud processing. We've seen a lot of success around our full version of Unifi that's available on the Azure Marketplace, where people are just one click. They can download and install and sort of assess the value of that. And so that, you talk about freemium, that does seem to be more common today of the ability for people to do that. And I think if you align kind of the model that people are looking at from the sort of prep and catalog discovery space as being very parallel to the modern BI seat, where somebody can download and give the BI seat a try for 30 days and make sure that sort of works. Sort of a similar parallel around the sort of the EIM aspect, the modern EIM aspect of self-service data pipelines is sort of the area that we're looking at.
Yeah, I'd actually totally agree with both those comments, Geoff. I think one of the things that's very interesting to note is that the big data space players, the Clouderas, the Hortonworks, the Amazons, the Googles, have all started to advertise and bring up their platforms to be far more user-friendly. I mean, many years ago, well, not so many years ago, actually, about 3 years ago, it could take anything up to 2 or 3 days to actually implement a Cloudera implementation and get it all up and running. It was very command line heavy. It was very specialist heavy. But now you can go to Cloudera Manager and spin it up in about 10 seconds. It's ridiculous. And I think that if you look at the way that Cloudera is moving with Hue and their implementation, and Hortonworks is moving with Ambari and their data platforms, and Cloudera with SDX, it's very much apparent that there is a move to make this as easy as possible and as cheap as possible so that everybody can have access to data. And I think that's very important.
Thanks to all of you, because those are great answers. And yes, and if we don't, then the data scientists it's going to be in their realm entirely, and then that keeps them from what ought to be their core function, or it may even just keep the companies themselves from using all the data. So great answers, all of you. Mike, what's next?
Well, that's an interesting segue into the next question, because I would suggest that with a lot of the freeware and stuff floating around out there, many business users are currently building their own little process, working with data from multiple sources, going around IT, data governance, and the rationale is historical. It's by the time IT gets around to addressing my problem, I don't have the problem anymore, or I've developed something else. So, how can data preparation help resolve this dynamic where people feel compelled to go around IT?
My favorite topic, the citizen data scientist. It's something that's sprung to life over, I'm going to say, the last year and a half. It's been driven by a number of vendors. I used to be one of them. But I understand where it's coming from, because the data preparation and the ability of being able to download freemium tools, and I would say the higher caliber of business analysts that are coming out of universities are actually driving the ability of these people to do a lot of what a data scientist does. You can go online and you can learn to program in Scala in a matter of days. You can understand how Python works. You can get a data prep tool, as you say, for 30 days. I think data preparation on an enterprise-wide scale, though, has to take into account exactly what we've all been talking about on this call, which is data prep is fine, the ability to connect to data is fine, but if you don't have the context to go with the data, and if the data is not stewarded in one way or another, whether it be machine learning, AI, or physical, the end results can be a mess, and you could end up with companies losing their shirts because they did something based on insights that weren't correct. So for me, it's all about the context and being able to control that context in a data prep environment, ensuring that they have the right results at the end of the day.
That's great stuff. Anybody else? Okay, Mike, what came in next? What do we have next?
Well, there's one that is of particular interest to me, and that has to do with this notion of what do we do with the data, and how can we prevent bad things happening with the data that we have, and especially with GDPR coming along and violations becoming very, very expensive. is privacy a core consideration in data prep strategies today? Do you think? We get varying results when we do surveys, but I'd like the panelists to weigh in, and you've all mentioned it, but I'd like to get your impression.
Well, that's a great question. Anybody?
I'll go again if nobody else wants to speak, guys. I've got no. So GDPR is one of my sweet spots. It's obviously, you can tell by my accent, I'm not from Florida, really. And it's quite interesting that I know. I've got into this in quite a big way. And GDPR and the regulations that are coming out around it from all of the states, not just in Europe but across the world. There's a regulation coming out in Australia next month. There's one coming out here in America in the next few months that you mentioned at the beginning, Geoff. And the problem with privacy and these new overarching regulations and the fines and the penalties that go with them is that they are basically transitioning a complete rethink of how enterprises are dealing with data. I've been in discussions. I was in Australia a month ago. I was in discussions with people out there that they're actually just going to purge their systems. They're going to do a complete purge of their data from their systems because they don't want to have the problem of privacy requests coming in. They're going to hold data for X amount of years. Now, that's all well and good, but again, it's cutting down on the availability of data for analysis, which means the analysis isn't as good as it could be, et cetera, et cetera. Why not put the rules in place that enforce privacy in downstream applications? Why not have a tool that can actually monitor and develop a landscape, an enterprise landscape, which shows you where all of that data is being used? And if somebody, for instance, in a business unit finds that they have a process that works with data, that process should be registered with that enterprise data protection officer, who should then put it into the landscape so that he knows where that data is being used. And that it's all about process control. That's how it should be pushed for GDPR, for any of these regulations. If we're going to continue to be very driven by data providers, i.e. the consumer, then we need to ensure that we can answer their questions, we can secure the data protection by design, and that we can actually deliver to that customer or that data provider exactly what they want. And I think it's an important sea change that in enterprises, and especially IT departments of enterprises, need to take on board very quickly. The landscape has changed, and the way we deal with data has changed. No longer can you have dev and test systems running around with production data in it just because it's behind a firewall. It still has to be protected. It still has to be controlled.
Right. It's my hope that all of this concern about privacy will drive greater use of things like data prep and greater focus on it. So I hope that's where we're headed. Anybody else, or Mike, we're coming at the top of the hour. If there's one more quick one, we can, and if not, we can wrap this up. Either way.
Well, I'm thinking that probably given the time, it's probably, we can take a bunch of these questions offline.
Right.
So I'd say back to you, Geoff.
Okay, thank you. No, thank you to everyone, and what a great session. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you to everyone who attended. We'll be in touch with more insights soon. Thank you for joining us. And with that, we'll conclude the webinar.
Thanks, Geoff. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.